All right, all right. Everybody is talking about the Virginia governor's race right now, and I don't. Again, I say this every time I do this. I don't like to do just straight political analysis, but I think it's important to point out because there's a lot of people on the internet who are young like me and weren't necessarily paying attention to politics through for as long as I have. Because even though I'm very young, I've pretty much been totally aware of what's going on in politics and political trends since the 2008 election. That's also when I started paying attention to the economy. 2008 was a very big deal. That crash, that election, it was very important. It was a very important pivot point in American history, in my opinion, in modern American history. And so I've witnessed quite a few election cycles. I kind of understand the patterns, at least the way things work these days in modern America. And it should not at all be surprising if, what's his name, Glenn Youngkin, actually does pull off this win in Virginia. Because it's not that crazy. Crazier things have happened at the beginning of a president's term when there's a lot of energy on the other side. Yes, we had a lot of energy against Donald Trump 4 years ago, and people might look at that and say, oh, well, look, there was all this talk about, how much energy there was against Trump and how people just hated Trump so much. And yet, the Democrats did, better than the Republicans overall, as you would expect, for just the way that the pendulum ebbs and flows back and forth. Yes, for the midterm cycle, the Democrats did outperform the Republicans overall, but it wasn't amazing. They didn't have, a massive blue wave where they took back a bunch of state legislatures. They took back the House, the federal House, and that was it. And they didn't win too many upsets. You didn't see Beto O'Rourke defeat Ted Cruz. You didn't even see the Democrats win in a former swing state like Florida. We had one, statewide Democrat elected, and I can argue that I was there for that election. Let's just say I would call that into question. Don't tell the YouTube censors. But anyway, my point is there was nothing too fantastical that happened. You didn't see red states electing Democrats. Aside from the case of Doug Jones, and that was because of the unique circumstances surrounding Roy Moore. Had Mo Brooks, for example, been the nominee in that race, Doug Jones would have gotten creamed. It's because Roy Moore was so tainted by his past and, or by a smear campaign, depending on what your opinion is. I was never a big Roy Moore fan, personally. They were able to pick him off, but that was a unique circumstance. It's not that the people in Alabama were just so pissed at Trump that they said, you know what, we hate Trump so much, we, deep red Alabama, are going to elect a Democrat. It was, no, this Roy Moore guy has problems, and so we're not gonna turn out for him. Whereas back in 2010, 2009, we did see these sorts of incredible upsets, really historic reversals of what seemingly should have been set in stone elections. After Obama ascended to the throne, the anointed one, Barack Obama, after Obamacare was passed, after the birth of the Tea Party, there was a lot of real genuine victories for Republicans in the short term. Again, this is kind of getting to my point here. In places where they shouldn't have won, ordinarily, Republicans were able to win. People forget Teddy Kennedy, the brother of John F. Kennedy, died back in 2009, or was it 2010, and there was a special election held to replace him. And who won that election? It was Scott Brown, a Republican. Teddy Kennedy, Jack Kennedy's brother, dies and is replaced by a Republican in deep blue Massachusetts. I believe the last Republican senator before Scott Brown to be elected for Massachusetts was, I forgot his name. He was a black guy back in the 70s. And nothing since. And of course, that was not a sign that Massachusetts was turning red. It was just a sign that there was a lot of energy on the Republican side and that they were able to, in the short term, gin up some victories in places where they otherwise should not be able to win. We saw something similar in 2009 in New Jersey, a place that is actually electing their governor very soon too, just like Virginia. Chris Christie, a Republican, won in deep blue New Jersey. And Chris Christie was, at the time, considered a pretty outspoken conservative. He was very bombastic. He was very anti-union. Until his later years when he had to. I can't really explain Chris Christie. I'm not a fan. But my point is, at the time when he was elected, he was, and for the early part of his first term, he was considered to be a Tea Party firebrand. And it was because of that, that reputation from his early days as governor, that was what he was running on, trying to channel into when he ran for president in 2016, even though, it was absurd by then. Everyone knew who Chris Christie was. It was laughable that he would run for president. But there was a time when people actually did take Chris Christie seriously. And it would have been quite stunning, I'm sure, as a Democrat in New Jersey in 2009, right after we have this historic election where Barack Obama is elected, that New Jersey could elect a man like Chris Christie to be the governor. And so these two elections, the election of Chris Christie and Scott Brown, victories that ordinarily, under normal circumstances, just if you put on a generic ballot, you say, okay, you take these two states. There's an election, a statewide election. Who's going to win, the Republican or the Democrat? In both cases, you would say the Democrat ordinarily. But this was a sign that the early Obama administration was a special time when Republicans were uniquely energized. And so how this connects to the Virginia election. Virginia has been trending to be a blue state for quite some time. I know that Richard Barris has been reporting on the implied voter affiliation. I get party affiliation, implied party affiliation in Virginia, because people actually don't register as a party in that state. And his data shows that that the state, since Biden was elected, has been trending towards the Republicans. Now, is that necessarily indicative of a change in the long-term trend? Maybe, maybe not. But I don't think that it necessarily has to be a sign of the times that we're in. If Republican Glenn Youngkin is able to win in a state like Virginia, which has been written off for quite a few years, as it was for a time a red state, then it became a purple state, and it's been a blue state for the past few years. If Youngkin can come back and win statewide in Virginia, I would not necessarily look at that as a localized sign of, Virginia is trending back in the other direction. No, I would say that is a sign of the national environment, of just how strong the sentiment against the Democrats and Joe Biden is right now. And it would be an indicator of what we're going to see nationally next November in I almost said 2010, in 2022. And so I would say if Glenn Youngkin can win, if the guy in New Jersey, if he can do relatively well, I don't think that there's any serious chance that he's going to win. I don't think that anyone thinks the race is that close. But if he does really well in New Jersey and Youngkin is able to win in Virginia, in two places where ordinarily the Democrats should wallop the Republicans, in places where, in the case of Virginia, Joe Biden won by like 10 points. If the Republican is able to come back and erase that 10-point gap and win this year, 1 year later, I don't think that's a sign I don't think long-term trends turn on a dime like that. I think that it's a sign that we are going to come into a season where the Republicans do exceptionally well. And so what does that mean? What could we expect in that case? Well, we would expect in a place like Georgia or Texas, where the Democrats have been ascending for the last few election cycles. A few years ago, what were solidly red states are trending to be more competitive. Texas is still not competitive. Don't let anybody fool you on that. But Georgia certainly is. Georgia could very easily flip to be a blue state overnight in the next election. But if the national environment is so anti-Democrat or pro-Republican, depending on how you want to look at it, if the national environment is so favorable to Republicans that they're able to pull off a win in Virginia and at least have a strong showing in a place like New Jersey, then that means that the ascendance of Democrats in places like Georgia or Texas or even Arizona is going to be abated. Republicans are probably going to fare quite well in these states. It seems from what I hear that Donald Trump is certainly committed to getting Brian Kemp primaried in Georgia, so you'll have someone new on the ballot there, a fresh face that hopefully will be able to, for his own sake, generate more interest and excitement. And so, they might win a little more convincingly than Brian Kemp. They might win by, let's say, a couple of points, a safer margin. Not the 50,000 votes that, still a clear victory in the case of Brian Kemp. 50,000 votes is pretty slim, relatively speaking. Not as slim as Joe Biden's supposed victory in Georgia. Texas, likewise, I haven't looked, I can't remember. Who's up for re-election there? I don't think anyone is, because I believe Cornyn was just re-elected in 2020, and Cruz was re-elected in 2018, so there's no Senate elections, but there is a governor's election, so that'll be interesting, a gubernatorial election. Certainly rooting for Don Huffines to beat Abbott in the primary. Don't think that's going to happen yet, sadly. But Abbott probably will do just fine. He'll probably do about the same that statewide as he did before, because he's not somebody who's going to generate a ton of enthusiasm. There's quite a bit of dissension within the Republican ranks against Abbott, but I don't think enough to oust him. And in Arizona, where the Democrats just like in Georgia, in Georgia, the Democrats flipped 2 Senate seats, both blue. And I didn't even mention that. Herschel Walker, I think is going to be elected to the Senate. Again, this is all I'm talking about. If Youngkin wins, what is that indicative of? Or if Youngkin is really, really close. If the race is as close as we think it is, and the Republicans are this competitive in Virginia, what are the implications of that for 2022? That's what I'm trying to get at here. So yes, Herschel Walker would be elected to the Senate by a decent margin, probably 4 or 5 points. And in Arizona, I can't remember. I don't know if they have anyone decent running there. Well, I guess they have, who's that guy? I think he was not the Attorney General. The Attorney General's running, and then there's a pretty decent, outspoken guy. I can't remember his name right now. But anyway, you get my point. These swing states are not going to continue to trend to the Democrats in this election. They're not going to swing, or I should say, they're not going to swing even further towards the Democrats in this election. The Republicans will probably hold on there. In a place like Nevada, where the Democrats have been stubbornly hanging on, and the Republicans have been, nipping at their heels, the Republicans likely are going to overtake them statewide. Although, again, I'm making generalizations here. This would depend, of course, on who they nominate, who the candidates are. Are they a bad candidate? A bad candidate can squander a positive environment. That's what Roy Moore showed. Roy Moore was a Republican nominee in Alabama. So the general election should be a formality. He lost the general election. And so that's certainly possible in a swing state. All I'm saying is, under the right conditions, 2022 is going to be a more favorable year for Republicans than even 2018 was for Democrats. 2022, if Glenn Youngkin is able to become the next governor of Virginia, very well may look like 2010 did for the Republicans. Which, let's be honest, the Democrats still haven't recovered from 2010 and from the Obama years when the Republicans made such great advances in state offices. The Democrats used to control a lot of state governments and state legislative chambers, and they control relatively few now. Certainly less than half the country. It's not 25. It's not 50-50. I think the Republican trifectas. I can't remember the last count, but it's quite high, probably in the 20s or something. And in certain states, Republicans have been able to do well in statewide, in state offices, in state legislatures, even where Democrats win statewide for federal offices like Senate or presidency. Places that come to mind for me are New Hampshire and Maine, where the Republicans not necessarily, they're certainly not in control of Maine right now. But my point is, they've been competitive. I mean, they passed the constitutional carry in Maine, which when we're talking about presidential elections, there's never a question that Maine is a blue state. But the Republicans have been a little better at trying to tap into local political issues. If you look at places where Republicans, win presidential elections, but the Democrats control the state, the actual state apparatus, places like, that used to be, it was in the past. It was West Virginia, Montana. Honestly, I can't think of many others. But, it is a problem. Oh, and you look at governors in the Northeast. I mean, you have this phenomenon of the Northeast Republican. You have Charlie Baker. You have Larry Hogan. You had that guy up in Maine. And the way that they were able to win was by distancing themselves from the National Republican Party. You just don't really have that in Democratic politics. Joe Manchin is trying to do that. Joe Manchin wants to be a different kind of Democrat, a West Virginia Democrat who is competitive in that state. And the National Democrats either don't understand or don't care, and they resent him for it because he actually wants to win in his state. You hear a lot more complaints about rhinos in the Republican Party than you do about dinos in the Democrat Party, and that's because the Democrats don't have much of a tolerance for them. They don't really exist. I mean, in my opinion, that's why they continue to lose Florida. The last Democrat governor of Florida was a Dixiecrat. His name was Lawton Chiles. He was from Lakeland. Somebody like Lawton Chiles could never be a Democrat today. Although that kind of Democrat would be competitive, or I shouldn't say competitive, because, Democrats are competitive in Florida. They just can't, they don't know how to finish the job. They can't make it over the edge. They still lose out, even if it's only by a little bit. And it's because they don't pick candidates who are, well-suited and can be popular statewide. And I think that this is probably true in a lot of other states. So we'll see what actually happens in Virginia and New Jersey. Again, I don't expect New Jersey to actually, be in play, but it'll be interesting to see how close it is, or how not close it is. We'll see if the Democrat wins by 15 points, which is, more what you would expect, or if it's, within single digits. That would be interesting. Or I should say low single digits. High single digits, that still might be acceptable. It is just a statewide race. But the Virginia race, it is genuinely interesting. And I hate politics now, but I did really like it for a while in terms of, I liked studying it. I liked the logic of it, even though, it is so stupid and, and just mind-melting. So, with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.